This has never happened before in the history of the NBA. Let me explain. Some idiot made this video before the season started, and immediately it looked like a massive mistake. The Celtics started the season looking nothing like a contender, winning just 2 of their first 7 games despite a pretty weak schedule. Their struggles continued through the rest of 2021, and by late December, they were 3 games under 500. They were an underwhelming, uninspiring, kind of gross team to watch, and after years of thinking that they were the next best thing in the NBA, it was time to reset our expectations for the Boston Celtics. They were a talented but underperforming team and nothing more. And yet, things were even uglier than just the record and metrics. Players and coaches were calling out the team publicly, which led to the always comical players only meeting, which has like a 5% success rate. And by this point, I was pretty much ready to call it quits on the Celtics. Having 2 young two-way wings was a great idea on paper, but in actuality, if neither of them became a top-tier playmaker, their offense was pretty much always going to be stagnant. And at the very least, I thought that Marcus Smart should be traded for a real perimeter playmaker, since we had pretty much a 2-year sample size that this roster was never going to be a contender. The days of Boston being the next great super team were over. Kyrie and Al Horford had left, Anthony Davis wanted no part of Boston, Gordon Hayward left with a surprising amount of disdain, Kemba Walker came and left without much of an impact, and after missing on first-round picks for years, an organizational shakeup prior to the season and an awful start to it pointed to the future of this roster being seriously in question. But then something happened. They started to figure it out defensively, and they won 5 of 6 games in early January. Then they lost 2 games in a row to the Hornets and Trailblazers before 2 more impressive wins. Then a blowout loss to the Hawks, and then it actually happened. They didn't lose a game for over 2 weeks, a 9-game streak that was somehow snapped by the Celtics' odd kryptonite this season, the Detroit Pistons. But then they overcame that to go on a 16-2 stretch from late January to early March before extending that to a 24-4 stretch over a span of 2 months. Now let's rewind just a bit here. As the Celtics started to turn things around in early January, something interesting was happening. A lot of the advanced projections were shifting towards Boston being a real legitimate contender, which was surprising for a team that at that point was still right around 500. These numbers pointed towards Boston as a sleeping giant amongst Eastern Conference contenders, and now they're basically the 1 or the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So for half the season, the Celtics were a 10th seed with a worse record than the Wizards and Knicks, a team that looked headed towards a massive roster shakeup over the next few months that had serious question marks in the front office, coaching staff, fit of the roster, future outlook, and overall chemistry, before then turning into an absolute juggernaut, pummeling teams on their way to being the best team in basketball for the second half of the season. This incredible turnaround has no parallel throughout the history of the league. These are the first 35-game records of the 1 and the 2 seeds in each conference from the last 2 seasons, and Boston's record is 7 games worse than even the worst teams listed here. And if you go back through all of modern NBA history, you will not find a single 1 or 2 seed in either conference with a worse start to the season than the Boston Celtics this year. As of the recording of this video, the Celtics have won over 82% of their games post All-Star break, a number that puts them in elite company. 21 modern teams have won 81.8% or more of their games post All-Star break in NBA history. 19 of them made the conference finals. The only 2 that didn't were George Karl coached Nuggets teams, each of which lost in the first round. 14 made the finals, and 9 of them won the title. That is the kind of company the Celtics have put themselves in the second half of the season. So not only were the Celtics bad and then became really good, they became so good that history tells us that based off of their performance in the second half of the season, they are as real a contender as any other team in the NBA. And again, that doesn't happen. The only historical comparison that's even kind of close is the 2014-15 Cavs, who won just 19 of their first 35 games in their first year with LeBron back in Cleveland, as he was dealing with a back injury, and then they went on to get the 2 seed. But none of that is the craziest part of this video. This is. If you were to show someone these numbers and the insane turnaround that Boston has had this season, you'd probably assume that there was a massive roster shakeup in the middle of the season that caused it. But that wasn't the case here at all. The same team that went 16-19 is also now a serious title contender. Now, to be fair, there are 2 exceptions to this. 1, Jaylen Brown missed 14 of their first 35 games, and 2, they did make some moves at the trade deadline, including bringing in Derek White. They also got rid of some guys like Dennis Schroeder and Josh Richardson, and they brought in Daniel Daniel Tice, but here's the counter to that. One, they went 7-7 in the games without Jaylen Brown, which is even better than their record in the games in which he played. And Derek White has been impactful for them, but he hasn't really been all that good offensively. And really all they did was add players by subtraction. They got a little bit healthier, added a solid two-way two-guard, cleaned up the rotation a little bit, and went from 16-19 to a 24-4 stretch over a 2-month span. And it isn't just the record, because if it was, this wouldn't be nearly as interesting. Plenty of playoff teams every year have a better record over the second half of the season than they do over the first half for a variety of reasons, the most prominent of which is the fact that there's a lot of teams tanking late in the season, and the playoff teams are much more incentivized to play all their guys and win because of the implications of playoff seeding. But again, the record doesn't tell the full story here. In that 24-4 run, the Celtics were winning by an average of over 14 points per game, putting up by far the best defensive rating in the league and being up in most games by a comically large margin before they even got to halftime. That point differential is insane, and nobody else is even close. The second place team are the Memphis Grizzlies. They're 2 full points behind them. And the third place team is the Phoenix Suns, who are 5 full points behind in point differential in that stretch. They aren't just winning, they're winning by massive margins, and again, are a serious title threat. How dominant they've been over the last couple of months has even allowed them to creep towards the top of pretty much all the advanced numbers that we have, even when you include that 35-game stretch in the beginning of the year. As I said earlier, they had the best defensive rating in the league when they were going 24-4, but they also have the best defensive rating in the league across the entire season and the second best net rating for the entire season. You have to be a special kind of dominant to basically wash away a really bad start to the season, and that's exactly what the Celtics have done. So how has this happened? Well, for the sake of the video, it would be simpler if it were just one or two things, but it isn't. It all starts with their defense, possibly the most dominant modern defense we've ever seen. The Celtics were pretty much always an above average defensive team under Brad Stevens, but they also had the roster to be even better than that, with this year's team finally tapping into their full potential. Playing the biggest lineup in the league, they have Smart as an oversized 1, same with Brown and Tatum at the 2 and the 3, and then Robert Williams at the 4, and Al Horford at the 5. The key to their dominance is their size, length, and what that combination allows them to do with Williams. Rather than sticking him at the rim and asking him to guard a ton of pick and rolls in their switch-heavy defense, they put him at the 4, playing him off the ball and allowing him to just create havoc everywhere he goes. They switch everything. Horford mans the traditional responsibilities at the 5, and Robert Williams is the ultimate backup plan if anything goes wrong. And as they go to the bench, they continue to morph and change their tactics, with Peyton Pritchard putting in enough effort on defense to justify him getting on the floor to boost their shooting. Grant Williams has become a great low-volume shooter as well, and he's always had great defensive versatility, and White is the perfect do-everything combo guard that fits anywhere you need him to. But the defense is just one piece of the puzzle, albeit a very big one. Smart has suddenly become the point guard that this team has always needed, facilitating and organizing in a way that I never thought was possible for him. Gone are the days of him playing pretty much exclusively off the ball and chucking up bad threes. He's become a real legitimate NBA point guard and has once again become one of the best defensive players in the league. The offensive hierarchy also appears to have finally been established after years of jockeying between Kyrie, Kemba, Hayward, Brown, and Tatum. Tatum is straight up better than Brown as an offensive player at this point, specifically as a playmaker and decision maker, and that allows Brown to slide into a role that is much better for him as a great two-way two-guard. And Tatum himself probably deserves his own video at this point because his season has been unreal. He's always had the tools to be a great defender, but he's never been more locked in on that end of the floor than he has this season. Offensively, his handle is tighter, his playmaking is much better, and his decision-making is night and day from the past, making him one of the most elite offensive weapons in the league. He's had some crazy scoring performances, even going head-to-head with guys like Kevin Durant, and if he had played like this for the entire season, the MVP debate would not be a debate at all. It would be Jason Tatum. And lastly, and potentially most importantly, this team just feels different. For as great of a coach as Brad Stevens was, something was missing over the last couple of years. The talent was there, but the toughness wasn't. And I don't know what Ime Udoka did to change that this season, but whatever he did, he deserves a ton of credit. Whether it was him calling out the team in the beginning of the season or just being a new and different voice, their level of effort, intensity, chemistry, teamwork, and desire to win has never been even close to where it is right now, and he deserves a ton of credit for that. And really my only concern with Boston at this point, apart from them staying healthy, is that they're destroying teams so badly that they don't really have a ton of crunch time reps with this group. A lot of their crunch time numbers are actually really bad because they're from the beginning of the season before they turned everything around, because they don't really play close games anymore. Their offensive options in late game situations, outside of just give it to Tatum and hope that he can create something, are definitely limited, and that could be a concern in the playoffs. But at this point, if your only real issue is the fact that you're beating teams so badly that you don't have enough crunch time reps, you're doing pretty good. So history tells us that this Celtics team is as legit as any contender can get. When you go on a stretch like they have the second half of this season, it doesn't happen by accident. Every number, every metric, every eye test that we have says that they are as dangerous as any other team in the league. And at this point, if they're the team that ends up winning the title this season, I wouldn't be surprised at all, which would be an incredible outcome from the greatest in-season turnaround in NBA history.